Our next session is as Executive Vice President, Managing Director North America, Angela Hills is responsible for driving Cielo's increased market penetration, expansion strategies, and service delivery. With more than 20 years in talent acquisition and management, Angela serves as the Chief Evangelist for helping organizations engage with Cielo's differentiated talent solutions. Cielo's business continues to grow globally, and as MD of North America, Angela has a unique vantage point into the needs of their clients in the U.S. and beyond. And she will share some of those talent acquisition trends and impacts with us now. Please join me in welcoming Angela Hills.
So thank you guys. Glad to be here today. And I actually am going to talk a little bit today around trends. Every year, and I think even Debbie mentioned last night that our industry tends to have a thing when it comes to acronyms, and I think buzzwords is another one that we tend to have a little bit of a thing with. So today I thought I'd talk a little bit about what I am going to predict as one of the buzzwords or trends for our industry, for HR, this year. And every year there's like the team of the year, the color of the year, and for any of you who haven't been staying up and current on that, this year's color is Marsala. So think red wine, not margaritas, but red wine. But this year's color is Marsala. I'm going to go with the trend and prediction, if I can get the slides to work here, that this year it's going to be alignment. So we're going to talk a little bit about several different elements around where alignment between the work that we do in different areas can really have a huge impact on our success organizationally. The first one I want to talk about is alignment between HR priorities and C-suite priorities. So as you see here, a survey that was recently done by The Economist identified that 41% of CEOs believe that their heads of HR are more focused on narrow HR agendas than broader organizational agendas. So you could look at this and say, hey, on the flip, 60% or so are actually focused exactly where we want. I think that might be true, but I don't think 40% not being there is enough. I don't think any of us would be satisfied with staying where we are here. So what is it that's driving that? And when you dig deeper into the data, what they also found is that most organizations will say that they have a very strong, most CEOs will say they have a very strong partnership with HR. They don't always look to us for strategy kind of ties. So when we think about how to move the dial on this and build stronger alignment, I think one of the best ways to tackle that is to really look at the business models that we use within HR and have more overt conversations with our leaders around what we're doing and how they tie to the organization's strategy. So one thing, for example, if we take a look at this as it relates to talent acquisition, for example, is what model we decide to build in order to be successful at delivering our business results. And on one end of the spectrum, you can take a look at a decentralized delivery model. And in a situation of this nature, just to kind of build out and play along and kind of get our heads into the game on this, you probably have different delivery approaches in every part of your organization. Everyone might be doing something very different when it comes to the processes and the approaches, a bit of a free-for-all. You might not have any consistency in terms of the different types of tools, technology, and processes that you use. There might be little to no governance. What this does provide is complete autonomy with different units within your organization around how they want to deliver and meet their needs. They have a lot of freedom, and that might be very well received. It also can be very expensive, and oftentimes you do tend to find that either HR generalists or agencies or other models of that nature tend to rule when it comes to how you're actually delivering on talent acquisition. On the other end of the spectrum, you have a centralized model. And in a model like this, you might have centers of expertise. You have more of a cohesive structure around who's leading and how talent acquisition has been leading. Typically, you have more consistency around the use of technology, around common practices and processes and approaches, and governance becomes a much bigger priority around how things are measured and what's being done. This can be really effective from a cost standpoint. It can actually allow for a lot more consistency around what's being done, but sometimes the question becomes, can it scale if we're trying to do everything with everyone in the same time in the same way? So on one end of the spectrum, centralized, on another, decentralized. When you bring to the center, oftentimes what we see is a nice balance around a matrix or a middle ground where you might have elements of an overall solution that are centralized, with flexibility and customization where needed. So some organizations that we work with, for example, might centralize certain practices for their larger hubs or enterprises, and for smaller areas within the business where they might have more unique needs or different kinds of requirements, they allow for more of a decentralized, flexible approach. So what does this have to do with alignment between HR practices and the business? To me, the more we are overt about talking about where we are on this grid and where we want to be and why, and how it ties to what we're trying to accomplish from the business, the better we start to build that alignment. So think about where you are. Think about what you're trying to accomplish and talk with your business leaders about where you're being intentional about the choices you make along this grid. Make sense? I think the next piece of it is also thinking about it when it relates to financials. So just as we talked about delivery models, you can also take the same theory and the same practice when it comes to financial funding models. And on one end of the spectrum, again, fully distributed, would be kind of the chargeback model, where all services that might be provided within the organization are actually charged back to the business unit, to the geography, to the most granular level of the business possible. This can be really fantastic and a very smart model to utilize if you're trying to increase the level of accountability and responsibility at the business level. If you want to make sure that people are aware of how much it actually costs to do the work that they're asking for you to deliver. It can also just help them make sure that they're just really aware of what is important and what isn't in terms of the services that are being provided when they have to actually pay for it, right? On the flip side, if you fully centralize the funding model, if you're trying to make a big bang, a bold change, you want to move quickly with regards to investments in some big initiatives, having all of the funding centralized can help you get there faster with less decision-making and folks involved in all of that. So it can have its place. It can allow you to make big strategic leaps with regards to what you're trying to accomplish, but sometimes the flip of what we just talked about, it can reduce flexibility. It can make things a little harder for people to have the awareness of what they're doing. So just as we talked about with regards to the delivery model, think about where you are, think about where you want to be, and which of these models or what combination actually best aligns to the strategy and the business needs that you have in your organization. And have the conversation with your business partners so they know why you're doing things the way that you are and that it is actually by design, right? So again, just some ways to think about how to align business and HR. The next thing I wanted to talk about is related to the notion of talent acquisition and talent management. So one of the things that Zachary alluded to a little bit in the introduction and background, my experience, and I stopped counting and changing the intro with the 20 years thing after it hit 20, so I haven't updated more. But I've, over the course of my career, had the great opportunity to spend a lot of time in all elements of talent acquisition and talent management. So in addition to what we do at Cielo that's heavily focused on the talent acquisition side of the house, you know, I've done work personally with succession planning and career management, performance management, and all of those things. So the whole spectrum of this is a personal passion of mine. We saw this study recently coming out of Silk Road. 49% of organizations said that the top thing they were worried about was engaging and retaining employees. And one of the next highest things, 34%, was recruiting the best employees. And while it's great to see both of these things high on the priority list, I actually don't think you solve one without the other. And a lot of our content today has been along those lines, that these two things need to be connected, and they need to be viewed as one and the same. In the same study, Silk Road identified that I think it was about 27% of organizations said that the reason why they haven't done more to align talent acquisition and talent management was due to cost. And if there's not a burning platform now, there never is going to be a better one in terms of what's going on with regards to the competition to finding talent and to keeping people in organizations to solving for this. I do think that there are real costs to not addressing this issue as well. And they come from kind of three core areas. One is in relation to inconsistent processes and procedures. So if you don't align the things that you do in talent acquisition with the work that you're doing in talent management and have consistent practices between how you bring people in that are from the outside and how you move and address mobility with people internally, there are real compliance issues out there. So it's important to make sure to tackle those correctly. There are also unnecessary duplications of cost. And if you don't think that you have duplication or inconsistencies between your internal practices and your talent acquisition practices, ask your new hires. Odds are they will be able to tell you where they see the inconsistencies of their experience as a candidate and what changes when they become an employee, right? So ask them. They'll give you some great visibility to the things that you have opportunity in there. And third, transparency. So think about where you have disconnects between the data and analytics and the information that you track. So often, we tend to talk about things so differently between talent acquisition and talent management. If you're doing this really well, you will have the common language across the entire spectrum. You'll talk about the same competencies, the same behaviors when you think about what you're looking for in hiring, as well as what you're assessing people against with regards to performance management and what you promote against. You'll be able to track and assess data around quality in the same way because you're looking at data and you're tracking the same information from the beginning of the cycle through an employee's entire journey. And again, certainly opportunity here for most organizations, but real costs if you don't get that right. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this eye chart. However, I did want to just share it from the perspective that when we think about this concept around talent acquisition and talent management blurring and merging together, there's a continuum here. So again, think about where you are and where you're aiming to be. On one end of the spectrum, we tend to see things in a more transactional format, and as we move up and forward toward this end of the chart, you tend to see things with increased value and in terms of what we're supporting to the business. The third thing I wanted to talk about is the connect between talent analytics and business results. So you knew data was going to have to come in here somewhere. And this is actually one, I don't know if I can see Elliot out there, but sorry to do this. This is a LinkedIn quote. But 24% of the organizations that they polled said that they were using analytics well in how they inform their talent acquisition processes. Only 24%. So the vast majority said that they weren't doing a very effective job at this. When it comes down to it, so much of this and where our opportunity is to blend this is to really be looking across the spectrum and digging into data more. And I think we can do this from a micro level as well as a macro level. So at the micro level, are your recruiters actually using data around supply, demand, compensation, competition for talent in the conversations that they're having with hiring managers to ensure that they're actually consulting and supporting people and making the right decisions and the right strategy around how you go for talent? At the macro level, are you using similar data to make decisions around where to open a new facility or how to make strategic decisions on at a business level and a broader level? What we found in our own research at Cielo last year, our talent activation index, is that leading organizations were 12 times more likely to do this well than lagging organizations. We also found that there tends to be sort of a trend and progression as it comes to the use of data and analytics. So for example, in addition, leaders tended to be more likely to utilize data in more sophisticated ways to track the quality of their workforce as well. So building on that, another study that we came across with in the last year, 56% of HR leaders were feeling like one of the biggest priorities they have is to actually help their HR organizations be more strategic versus tactical. I see a few of you nodding. This really is highly aligned to a lot of the comments that our HR leaders in the panel discussion mentioned earlier today. And it's a challenge for all of us, right, on how do we make sure that we're staying where we need to be on this spectrum. I actually do think that data is a really important piece of this puzzle. And as we think about this, how do we actually leverage more meaningful data around the quality of our workforce, the talent that we have, the talent that we're seeking, in order to move the dial on this front? So I've got two more alignment areas to talk about. The next one is local execution and global governance. So this is another one, as CLO has had the opportunity to work with global organizations at least for the last 7 to 8 years in supporting our clients globally with regards to TA work. We have definitely learned through trial and error that the balancing act between providing global governance with meeting the needs of local organizations can sometimes be challenging. And whenever there's a desire to launch anything organization-wide, whatever that means for you, oftentimes it means we want to have a lot of things the same, or we want to do what worked in one area and what worked by those who kind of began the whole journey, and we want to spread that across the business and across the organization. And what we've often found is that it is very challenging because there are genuine, unique needs and differences within local markets. So as you see here, Burson by Deloitte identified that 68% of HR leaders did not feel that they were prepared at all to support the global needs of their organization with regards to talent issues at a local level. And some advice and thoughts that I would suggest to you here is really, we often talk about it internally as local first, global second. So always keep in mind that the main priority is how do we meet the needs, the business needs of the local constituents, and make sure that we can help them run the business that they have by supporting their talent needs. And from there, building the global infrastructure, the global communication, the reporting, and the visibility and transparency on top of that, as opposed to the other way around, and starting with global and then trying to figure out how to customize it to each region. I sometimes think of this one as when it's done right, it does feel a little bit like organized chaos by design, when you get a little bit of uniqueness going on in every part of the business, but still with some framework that allows everyone to communicate and have the same common view of where are we and what are we looking to accomplish. One of the other common things that gets in the way of alignment here is that sense that when one part of the business is not complying, not cooperating, not going along with things, that they're probably just troublemakers or they're being difficult. And I would encourage you to always ask the question, why? What business problem are they trying to solve that we're not solving for them with our global or centralized or common approach to this? Because there's probably something that can be learned from that. Maybe there's an idea, maybe there's a unique element, maybe they just need to be heard. But whichever element it is, there are great opportunities to stop and not assume that people are not complying because they're just, being difficult, but that they really have some need that you can help them address. So great lessons to learn there. And we'll catch you up on a little bit of time, give you a little time for Q&A, but we might have 5 minutes extra. The fifth thing that I wanted to talk about was employer brand and external brand. So here's another stat. 73% of CEOs were concerned about the lack of available skills and talent. Now, whether you believe this or whether you believe that this is more impression and not necessarily actually aligned to the talent disconnect that there might exist, the feeling is there. And given the complexity and the competition for talent in today's job market and numbers in the job markets, which I think come out again Friday of this month, being at all-time, record competitive levels, the opportunity for us to take advantage of really leveraging our employer brands is at an all-time high. So I have, in my past life, spent some time doing consulting work around culture and alignment. And so often we talked about the notion of brand integrity. And the word integrity comes from the word integer, meaning one. So when this is done well, the brand that you have externally and the brand that you have internally are one. They're the same. There's no disconnect between the two. And who you are is what you explain to people that you are, and what you sell to people that are coming to your organization is consistent with who you are. It goes both directions. So there's great opportunity here, and there's never been a better time to really focus on the importance of brand. Some of you might be thinking that this is great and easy if you have a well-known, recognizable organizational brand. If you're a consumer brand, for example, and people know by name and recognition who you are. Others might be in business-to-business environments where your organization is not a household name. And how there do you make sure to take advantage of the brand experience that you have? And a couple things for thought. One is every experience. One of the things that we believe very strongly at CLO is the importance of candidate experience. And every touch point Every touch point with a candidate is an opportunity to actually evolve and deepen the experience of that brand or a chance to erode it. So making sure that the way that you interact with folks at every step of the way ties to who you are and the brand that you're trying to align with. Another thought is just in relation to that notion of the challenges. Sometimes we have a great story to tell and it's easy, and sometimes organizations might be going through a lot of change, and how do you express the importance of brand at that point in time? We have one organization, one client that we've worked with, and they were going through a massive amount of organizational restructuring, spinning off business units, focusing their business into new areas, lots of feedback, and if you'd looked at them up at Glassdoor a couple years ago, you would not want to be doing anything with the organization. They were in a really challenging time. And as we work with them, to take a look at it. The first wave that they were trying to kind of address this was probably a little bit of sugarcoating, which you can imagine didn't work that well. They were trying to tell a better story than maybe what the reality was at a really difficult time of bringing talent in. As we worked and came together to figure out what the solve was, we started realizing that there were some really important ways to take the truth of where they were, as well as aligning it to the future vision of where they were trying to go, and tell a more accurate story to why somebody would join. And as soon as we started applying some of that to the story, to their employee value proposition, we started to see a whole different connect with regards to employees. So instead of telling people a great story and having people not stay because, as I think Beverly mentioned earlier today, that what I was promised isn't what I experienced when I got there, they started telling the story and saying, you know what, this isn't for everybody. We're going through a really tough time. But if you're motivated and engaged by being able to really move us from where we are to the future, if you want to be part of the change from the inside, if you're excited about the idea of coming into a challenging situation and turning it around, you're not going to find a better opportunity than here. So as soon as we started actually picking up on the reality, again, that integration between who they are and where they wanted to be, we started moving the dial on that. So great opportunities with regards to that as well. So as I finish that out, one of the other things that comes into my background is I did have the opportunity to do an MBA several years back, and not at Wharton here in town. I lived in Chicago at the time, so I went to another school, Kellogg in Chicago, and having the HR background that I did make the attempt to try and take a lot of courses and focus my efforts in other practices. So I took a lot of strategy classes when I was there. And one of my favorite strategy classes, we talked about 3 of the top ways to build competitive advantage. The first thing that they talked about was sort of the bricks and mortar kind of approaches, that either you have an oil field somewhere that nobody else can capture, which today may or may not actually help you. You might have gates at an airport that nobody else can actually capture, or other things along those lines. The second we talked about was unique walls and strength that you have with competition and with your actual customers. So network externalities and all those kinds of things that you hear about in business schools around just ways to build networks and connectivity that allows you to have an advantage that others can't copy and can't replicate. And the third thing that we talked about, which certainly got my juices flowing from an HR background, was the people and talent and practices around culture that we all bring to the table. And a lot of what I took away from that is that the things that are hard to measure, the things that are hard to document, the things that are hard to actually describe, by definition, because they're hard to measure, document, and describe, are hard to copy. So when we do all these things right and you start to build the alignment that we're talking about, you actually start to create something that's incredibly hard for others to replicate, incredibly hard to copy. And that's where the value of the work that we all do gets to be exciting, right? So I wish you all luck. I think we do have a few minutes for some questions. So I'd like to open up if anyone's got some time for thought and want to share some questions with the group. All right, I see one in the back.
Bill's got a
Bill?
Just a minute, Bill. Yeah, Bill. Jason's running.
You spoke of EVP, an employer value proposition. I think that's questionable whether that actually exists in all-encompassing. I wondered whether you could speak a little bit more about how it's possible to have one EVP that applies to everyone.
No, it's a great question. And I do think that there are micro levels to that. So, there's certainly an overarching view as an organization of who you are and what it is that you promise to your employees and to your candidates that might be considering coming to work with you. I think you're probably right that there are a lot of nuances to that. And many of the multinational or larger organizations that we work with, you can have a different employee value proposition for a different division, a different function, a different country. We were doing some work with one well-known organization, and they're in the consumer brand space. And we're trying to find technology people to work for them in a small, discrete area of Poland. And the things that you might consider and why many of the people in their sales and marketing organization would come to work for them did not apply. And they were looking to build this talent out in a part of the world that didn't even know the brand nearly as well as those of us in North America or the western parts of Europe. So for that, we had to build a very micro kind of way to articulate. So there's this big brand, but then specifically, why would you want to come and be a technology person within this organization at this time? So I think there is usually you want to have it hang together, but the more granular you can get around thinking about the unique the unique promise, and we think about EVP really as just what's the promise that you're making to your employees and to people who might come to join you around what their experience will be. So when you look at it that way, there's the big picture, and then you definitely want to get as granular as you can be. Would agree. What else? Other questions? All right. Thank you very much.